Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. We are so excited to have you here today. I'm Patricia Elise, and I'll be your MC for today's webinar. AI4 is so excited to present the state of AI in manufacturing. So we're looking forward to having some amazing panelists here for you today. Just one quick housekeeping item. In order to ask questions to our panelists, please use the Q&A feature as opposed to the chat. This makes it easier for us to organize your questions, and we want to make sure we keep the conversation going. Thanks so much. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome our panelists to the virtual stage. All right, I'll hand it over to our moderator, Maria.
Thanks, Patricia. Thanks everybody for joining. We're excited to talk to you today about the state of AI in manufacturing. And as we get into it, we'll start with introductions. So I'll call in Alana Cento to start us off.
Great, thanks. Hi everyone, my name is Alana Cento. I work for Sinequa, which is an intelligent search platform. We work with mainly large, global, complex organizations, mainly in manufacturing and pharmaceuticals, along with a few other verticals. And they work with us to really find a tool to surface insights from various content repositories, really large amounts of data, especially unstructured data, ultimately helping them to increase things like productivity, reduce business risk and costs from things like delays, mistakes, time to market, and among others. So I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great, thanks, Alana. Carol Pinart.
Hi, I'm Carol. I work for Nestlé, which is the largest consumer packaged goods company. I have a couple of roles, but I'm here today as one of the leads in the AI program. And when it comes to manufacturing, just to give you some numbers, we have 450 something factories, over 5,000 production lines, and we sell 1.3 billion products every day. So it's a large operation.
Very nice. Thanks, Carol. And then Sanjay Kumar.
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. So Sanjay Kumar, part of the Siemens Digital Industries organization. So I'm responsible for our smart manufacturing and rapid application development portfolio of solutions built around MindSphere and Mendix. My background is in
Oh, looks like we might have, there you go. I think we momentarily lost you. Sanjay, if you want to unmute yourself.
All right, can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so let me wrap by my background is in manufacturing and technology solutions. Advise clients on the appropriate solutions utilized in the field of manufacturing and AI. Good to meet you all.
Great, thanks, Sanjay. And my name is Maria Araujo. I work for Johnson & Johnson. Johnson & Johnson, of course, is very famous for baby shampoos, Band-Aids. We have three segments within J&J, the consumer products. We then have medical devices where we make orthopedic implants, sutures, and so forth, contact lenses. And then we have our pharmaceutical business. Of course, the COVID vaccine is one of the ones in the news recently, but also various other types of pharmaceutical products. I work in the corporate supply chain for J&J. I'm part of our innovation and insights team, and I lead our sensing and IoT team within that, really looking to bring innovation into J&J. So AI specifically is a core aspect of that. So thanks everybody again for the introduction. So I guess we're ready to go and get our discussion started. And with that, our kind of warm-up question is, manufacturing AI, a perfect match or a breakup waiting to happen? So with that, I'll ask maybe Sanjay, you want to get started with that?
Yeah, great question there. So is it a breakup waiting to happen? I don't think so. At the end of the day, when we talk about insights is all about using data and making faster, better decisions. And the promise of AI is prediction and self-learning. So I think this is definitely the wave of the future, in my opinion.
I'll chime in on this one as well. I'll say, I think obviously we all know AI has been around for decades. Of course, the recent in the last few years, you had the recent advancements, whether it's in computing processing power, in the algorithms themselves, have really enabled, I think, what we're seeing, the wave of AI we're seeing today. And I'm also of the opinion, like Sanjay, it's definitely here to stay and here to continue to. We're seeing the early revolution continue to revolutionize not only manufacturing, but various other areas as well. So I don't know, Alana or Kara, if you guys want to add anything to that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I definitely would agree. I think that when, saying a perfect match, I mean, pretty much any technology that you look at says that it's AI powered. So I think for a lot of businesses, it's deciding what works best for them. But yeah, incredibly important, I'd say, for, improving efficiency, especially in manufacturing, things like real-time monitoring along production lines, but then also really supporting human decision-making. Not everything can be AI powered. We're always going to need to make really complex decisions, to really drive innovation. But AI is a huge supporter of that, to, allow businesses to be efficient and be able to, make the right decision with all the information that they have.
Very good.
Yeah, I would call it a great match, not perfect. Of course, now I'll tell you why I don't think it's perfect. It's great because it's going to help increase throughput very clearly, right? As Lana was mentioning, optimizing supply chain, for example, which is a big animal, and also accelerate research and development and the way we come up with new products, right, to manufacture. And it also can provide new business models and new value-added services, like, for example, mass customization, which is something that manufacturers like Nestlé have struggled with historically. I don't think it's perfect because it will require a lot of upskilling and reskilling of people to be able to work and leverage AI fully. So, there is this human component, and to make these two things work well, that's going to be challenging.
Yeah, and I agree with that too. I think it's a great match, as I said, not perfect, and really, and as Alana pointed out, I think it really is. It needs to be driven by business needs and business case, right? That's where it all starts, and then where does it fit in, right? It's not otherwise it's a shiny object, right? And it ultimately ties that back to what needs does it solve and what other opportunities does it create. So, anything else? Anybody has any other comments on that? Any other thoughts? Okay, I think we're ready to move on then to the next topic. So I guess, to get us really started deeper into the project, into the topic, what opportunities does AI provide when it comes to manufacturing? With examples, right? So I will maybe start with Carol this time. You'd like to get us started on that?
Sure. Number one for us by far is machinery maintenance and quality. So, for example, predictive maintenance or anomaly detection, like detecting if our frozen pizza have 3 pepperoni slices versus 4, right? That kind of thing. So that's by far the use case that's kind of mostly in production and beyond experiments. We're also leveraging, for example, digital twins and AI to optimize production processes to, that there's sometimes unplanned stoppage or there are some bottlenecks, and to help us with that. And that was really useful during COVID times, where we had to make a lot of adaptations and changes. And again, in R&D, we're starting to leverage and experiment with AI to gain insights on, customer trends, for example, or accelerate testing, or help us with sensory when we innovate and renovate our products. So we're starting to see a lot of AI helping us get faster to market with products that people will like more.
Okay. I'll comment here next on this. Various areas, I think, for us that AI is being leveraged. Things like inspection. So whether it's inspection of products or manufacturing a variety of products. So mix it many times with computer vision, with machine learning to automate those inspection points. Look for defects, sometimes defects that are very difficult to find, whether it's in consumer products, like in tablets, or even, pharmaceuticals. So that's a huge area that we're already working in, but obviously expanding, right? I think that there's a lot of opportunities in that space, the defect inspection or product inspection, if you will, through the manufacturing, right? Quality control, which again, the inspection part is tightly tied there with quality control, is another area where again, a lot of times a combination of computer vision and AI is a key enabler there, and an area we're heavily working on as well. The asset management aspect that you mentioned, Carol, another great area, predictive monitoring of assets, be they building assets or manufacturing assets, and it's probably, you know, kind of one of the first ones, right, that people go to. So I think that's another area. But even, you know, there's various others for us too. It's a broader, like if we think about robotics, right? I mean, and automation and robotics, you know, machine learning, again, many times coupled with either computer vision or a variety of other sensing technologies, is really enabling the next step of automation, adding a lot of intelligence, perception capability to those robots, so they can start to perform even higher level types of more complex tasks that they, for lack of a better word, they need to think through, if you will, right? And that's where the AI algorithms coming in with, again, the help of sensing to really enable them to make more complex operations as opposed to pre-programmed operations. So it's a huge area for us that ties into the flexibility of our manufacturing, and just, again, optimization. And I could go on and on in other areas, but I'll stop here and I'll add more later. But I'll let maybe Sanjay would like to go next.
Oh, yeah, thanks. I think my co-panelists have covered this fairly adequately. I guess for the audience, what I'll add is, I mean, if you think about what AI is, and if we've come from the world of statistics and statistical process control and the application. So essentially, everything you've shared, we've heard so far from the panelists, is true, right? Examples around product quality, manufacturing operations, quality inspection. I think that one of the examples that I probably could share is there's the element of what's called predictor quality. And for example, you probably know Siemens is a large company, so we manufacture automation products. So what we've done in our manufacturing facilities, virtually all of them, we've essentially taken them through that journey for Industry 4.0, of which a core part is analytics and AI. So primarily what we are seeing is, while we understand the foundational elements of predictive maintenance, there's also the element of predictor quality, which says, I understand the manufacturing process, I understand the dependencies, I understand the parameters in manufacturing. Where can I reduce the time, let's say, for sample inspection, or where there's activity that perhaps there was a manual check quality, kind of what, Maria, you were talking about for quality, but really from a process perspective, in applying AI to predict quality and reduce the number of steps, or make sure that the parameters can be potentially adjusted in the closed loop control system to improve quality.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'll just add to that. I think, an area like, APC, or advanced process control, that will tie very closely in there. In other words, there is that inspection at the end of the line, if you will. And at that point, if you catch it, you need to catch it. But then at that point, it could be scrap or a rework. In either case, it's costing more money than it should, as opposed to catching something in process like that, right? On the process control side, and actually act at that point where you can actually still fix the problem, if you will, without any substantial, much lower cost or no cost in some cases. So I think that very, very valid point. So Alana, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree with all that. I guess just something, like a little bit different, and to simplify it a lot is, I think, like, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, AI has definitely evolved to solve for, I think there's always been, since the start of it, like a major gap between computers and the AI that powers them and humans and the way that we think, and kind of bridging that gap. I think AI and technologies behind it have really started to solve for, like natural language processing, where people can actually go in, data is so complex. It's really, incredibly unstructured in a lot of cases. And AI really helps to enrich and normalize that, so that, people who are working, like, let's say design engineers, or if you're a biostatistician in pharmaceuticals, be able to actually, like, uncover those insights in the way that they think versus the way that computers think. Really saving them time, but also being able to speed up things like analysis and product development, and go to market faster, than they really could before, and they can make better decisions because of it. So I think that's kind of an interesting opportunity as of, you know, in the last, like I said, like 10 years that I think that we'll see continue to evolve, and, you know, manufacturers like yourself really continue to take advantage of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess I'll add a few other things, I think, in terms of opportunities, whether it's being done today or not. I think some opportunities that exist as well in the space are, you know, the new product introduction. I think somebody already touched on that topic a little bit. I think it's a huge area where AI can be, you know, it's already being leveraged in various areas, but I mean, the potential there is still a lot of potential to be captured, right, in terms of, for example, optimizing design processes, design constraints, and really accelerating that product development. I think that's an area that AI, again, is already being used, but I'm sure it will, you know, there's a lot of potential still to be there, to build on that. Obviously, even on the, there's the core manufacturing, but even on the logistics and distribution, I think that's another area that I still consider that manufacturing right now. I think it's another area where AI is already playing a big role in, and in that side, whether it's demand forecast, all the way from the beginning of manufacturing to distribution. And even things like, you know, when you think about touchless supply chain, think in manufacturing, things that touch the customer, right? Customer experience and enhancing that customer experience and getting insights from use of products, et cetera, such that it, again, feeds back into the manufacturing and even the product development side. I think those are all areas where lots of potential still for AI to really bring in lots of value from a manufacturing standpoint. So those are some other areas I think that, you know, and there's a variety of others as well. So I don't know, anybody else, any other thoughts on this? Any other comments? Okay, so let's move to the next question. So it's a good one. I think this is as good as, you know, technology is, and as much potential there is. The challenges are always there, right? So what are some of the challenges that organizations encounter when implementing AI for manufacturing? So with some examples. So I'll start with Alana.
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, we're working with a lot of manufacturers, I mean, implementing our technology along with others. And I'd say probably the biggest one is ensuring that the right resources internally, you know, and with partners and things like that are available to be able to implement technology, and making sure like what's required and that, you know, they're able to get them along with skill sets, you know, given. And I'd say once, you know, you're using AI, I'd say too, I mean, we think AI, we think automation, but, you know, it's not just turn it on and walk away. It's really ensuring that, you know, a lot of times you're having to train different models, make tweaks, set different rules. So ensuring that, you know, again, the right resource and skill set to be able to manage that and improve it on an ongoing basis is really important.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Carol, would you?
Sure, we have quite a few. I would say we can start with selecting the right use cases. This is a struggle because you know, there are some things that are easier to do, might not add as much value, or others are more complicated, or that require you know, modifying end-to-end processes. So how do you strike the balance between the things that are quicker wins and the things that will take longer but will yield a lot of value, right? So that tied into what Alana mentioned, resourcing and the governance. I mean, we are a very decentralized company. So sometimes we are doing implementations that affect more than one market, right? In terms of manufacturing, that we are manufacturing in a country, but you know, 80% of that is exported. So you have to have that into account. Also, kind of the end-to-end processes that we need to modify sometimes have a lot of silos, whether that's in data or in parts of the process, lots of different systems. It's like a patchwork of systems what we have, as you can imagine. And then scaling, because one thing is you pilot that in a couple of factories, but then scale it to the 400 and something, that has a lot of operational challenges. Just, I mean, with any technology, but this one is not deterministic, right? So some of the models, once we put them out in production, you know, they have to be monitored in a different way, and in some cases retrained. That is something that, you know, we are learning to do at scale at Nestlé, right? We're just scratching the surface. And finally, I think that the change management piece and the talent gap, I think Alana mentioned that as well, right? It is hard to find people that are skilled in putting this project in place and then being able to operate and leverage AI. So that is something that we are in all different pillars of our AI program. The talent gap and culture, in a way, for the change management beat is like it's right in the middle, actually.
Mm-hmm. Carrie, if I may ask, you mentioned scaling, right, as a challenge, and so compared to other types of digital technology, right, non-AI technologies and AI, what has been your experience so far in terms of the scaling challenges between, let's say, other types of digitalization technologies, just to compare with something fair to compare with, right, as opposed to AI? Do you see like substantial different challenges with AI or similar challenges? Or what would you say?
I think the main challenge is in understanding. It is more in the resourcing and governance rather than the technology itself. And by the way, we're starting to scale AI. We're at the very beginning of scaling, except for some things like there are more established like chatbots or using augmented reality to provide remote assistance. Those are more like mature use cases, some predictive maintenance as well. But for other things, we're just getting started, right? So when I mean scale, I'm not talking about having use cases in all our factories yet, right? But in my opinion, is more the resourcing, the governance, and understanding kind of the benefit. There's still a lot of or quite some misunderstanding on the value of AI and what that means. So we're spending a lot of time on the narratives in a way to explain. It's it's not a silver bullet, right? Sure. Which is for some it is, and some of our executive leadership it takes some time for them to understand. It has a lot of potential. It also has limitations, like any kind of type of technology, right? So I would say that one, just because the scaling AI is new, it's kind of difficult.
Yep, well, very good. Thanks, Carol. Sanjay, would you like to comment on that? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can give you some cross-industry examples also, but I think sort of building on that point about scaling, and to your point about, well, how is it perhaps different than other technology that maybe scale? I think one element comes into play. So let's take an example. Let's say you're manufacturing, and this is an example of an industry which has got large variations in their products. And so here, this client sort of, the two things came to play. One was sort of the executive buy-in and the convincing argument that yes, AI can do something. But sometimes what we see is the IT organization, because they're technology savvy and understand AI, they're the ones talking to the business. So the business is not convinced. So in this case, it took some convincing to work with the business to say, yeah, this is the use case. But the scaling conversation really got very significant because, number one, there were about 100 plus recipes that are being utilized in manufacturing this product. And when we narrowed it down, we said that there are about 30 unique recipes for which we have to build the AI model. Now, the question is, there were about 20 plants worldwide. It's not a plant. So now you say the time to build a model, 30 recipes, deployed to 20 plants around the world. What's the time frame? And what's my time to value, right? So in this case, while it was promising from a singular use case and a singular recipe, it did not make sense to really roll this out because by the time they got value, it will be too late. So that's one. And then we think about different industries. So in manufacturing, you've got applications within your production floor, but you're a manufacturer of machinery or equipment or pumps or assets that are utilized by others. Then you have this entire model of now remotely monitoring or giving insights to the users of what I manufacture. So the challenges that come into play in that case are more about, well, is that a business viable option? Will you charge more for that service? And two, are customers willing to accept that service? Do customers want that service? Because in some cases, what happens is, end of the day, folks who are managing, maintaining the equipment, more often than not, have been there for a long time, and you have to build that trust with the users. I've had a client where they said they put like 1,000 sensors on the equipment in one of the regions in the world. The insights weren't accurate and the users lost trust. So that's the other element in terms of challenges with AI is the trust factor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very good point. And if I may ask you, Sanjay, since I think you get exposed to various different industries, you said, do you see, especially from a manufacturing perspective, right, the substantial differences, at least up until now, in terms of the adoption of AI into manufacturing between, like, let's say aerospace, medical industry, consumer products? Do you see key differences, or it's all about kind of the same? What are your thoughts?
I don't think there are distinct differences. I think there's certain probably patterns where what I've seen is that equipment and product manufacturers are more likely to have been able to adopt AI because it's their equipment, their product. Like in your case, Maria, in your case, Carol, like you are essentially manufacturing the product, your product that you're applying the AI. In some industries, because they're a little bit older, and it's kind of hard to pin down a specific industry where the manufacturing process will depend on the equipment which is aging. In that case, it's tough to apply the analytics and AI because the availability of data is limited. So it's less about the industry. I think it's more about the availability of data that makes it more receptive for adoption.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's other factors too that come in: awareness at the C-level, awareness in manufacturing, and having that rationale that, yes, like Carol said, starting with the right use case. Mm-hmm. So I think overall, it's probably, I think it's more or less the same. I wouldn't single an industry out, one versus the other, versus automotive versus food and beverage. I mean, there's some reports so you can see that says food and beverage may be a bit behind, but they're coming on strong. Automotive may be ahead because given they've been making progress in the world of data and connected vehicles, so they see the value of data, applying it in manufacturing operations. So it does vary industry to industry. Chemicals, energy, and utilities, partly because of the sophistication of the control and SCADA systems and the need for that level of precision in quality and control. They tend to be at a stage where they realize that AI may not have a lot of applications, but that's slowly changing as they're finding that there is data that's not being utilized. Sure. So hopefully that helps. I mean, I don't think it's a straight answer. I could draw you a chart, but some feedback from my experience.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks, Sanjay. Yeah, I think from my perspective, I think it's share some of the challenges that were already described. I think scaling, of course, is one of the most challenging ones. J&J, for example, is a very diverse company, right? We have, like I said, medical devices, pharma, and consumer products. So as we think about even at an enterprise level, is scaling some of these things across this business that are very diverse, and then again, over 250 operating companies, it's a big challenge, right? And not to say that we need to have one solution for everything, but in the perfect world that would be the case, but in most cases it doesn't work that way. But still, you have to have the scalability, the cost effectiveness in mind. And then, so thinking about scaling the maintenance aspects of these algorithms as we go, for example, from a plant, or even sometimes, for example, in the case of predictive maintenance, from an asset to another, what kind of, what's the development work, if any? Is there development work for every single machine or every single plant? In that example, for example, even inspection cases, how much tuning is involved? And that, I think, all factors into the scalability and aspects of it, right? I think, and those are key. I think another key challenge, I think, in this space is highly regulated industry. So for us, medical devices, pharma, and consumer, and so also very regulated. So I think the validations, once you start introducing processes that are part of the quality and the validation of those processes, become potentially a significant challenge for AI. Not a challenge that is necessarily a barrier or a blocker, but it's a challenge, right? It's how do you validate that process now, that has something that potentially, there's, you can go into explainability of AI systems and all of that. And as it pertains to things, again, that are very controlled, need to be understood, approved by regulatory agencies like FDA, in the aerospace case, FAA, et cetera. This is, I think, another key challenge that I would say there's lots of people working on that problem, right? And it's a problem. I mean, it's a challenge that's, it's not a solved problem, right? And I think that's a very, from a manufacturing perspective, a very real challenge that needs to be understood. In some instances of some applications of AI, it's not an issue. Others, it's the core issue, right? I think that's another challenge. I think that's substantial there for AI. But again, not something can't be overcome, but something to be worked on, I think. But yeah, so I think that would be kind of where, in addition to what you guys already expressed, some of the challenges there potentially for our AI. Anything else anybody has to add to this as we discuss this, as we peel the onion a little bit more? Anything else anybody's mind?
Yeah, I guess just maybe to add, I mean, to all the points, but Sanjay, especially when you're talking about accessing those data and insights, I think one thing that we hear a lot is, everyone is adding new technologies all the time, manufacturers are, and while they're great and really useful, they also, put up they can oftentimes create more barriers between the data that lives within them. So, ensuring that you're connecting all of that data is probably, that's always kind of the second step in a lot of cases. You need to get the right technology in place, but then, how can you see that? How can you, see the data from where you're designing, let's say, a medical device at the very beginning, all the way to how your customers are, if they're satisfied with it, and kind of feeding that back into the product in a really efficient way. Like we hear that, all the time is a constant challenge that I think will continue to grow for a lot of businesses who might maybe struggle to address it, because it's, they'll continue to add these technologies, and then really being able to do that over time and over decades, is gonna continue to come up, I would say, and we definitely hear that. So
yeah, I think that's a great point, Alana, and very valid, and indeed a substantial challenge. And I would even add, I think even as we think about applications, for example, different vendors, there's things you might develop in-house, there's other things from an AI perspective, there's other things different vendors provide different solutions that are, let's say, I'll use the word niche, but what I mean is to specialize in some areas, and they do a very good job on that. So it's like, but how do you, from a strategic standpoint, how do you kind of take a step back and look at it holistically from an enterprise level, make sure you're not now having, 200, so how are you going to get to, how are you going to integrate that in? Because at the end of the day, a lot of the value is not only in those individual applications, but it's going to come to the next step is now I have value here, inspection, I have value here, predictive maintenance, I have value here, but then there's value now in connecting those things to your point. And if we don't think strategically that architecture and all those different puzzle pieces, we're going to end up with a bunch of blocks that don't talk to each other, and we don't have those insights. It's all siloed. And I think that's a big challenge as well. How to make it such that it doesn't go in that direction, right?
Yeah. And Maria, actually, I'm curious, I mean, within J&J, obviously you have a lot of different functions and, very distributed around the world. I mean, do you find that, you centralize those functions who are kind of overseeing the connection between all those systems? And if so, like, I'm sure that they're, you're addressing it. And in some ways, obviously, I think it's always going to be a challenge that will exist within manufacturers, but how do you typically, I mean, within J&J, how are you guys addressing that, and kind of who handles that and makes sure that it's, implemented properly?
Yeah, I mean, we have J&J, I would say, is a mix between the decentralized in some aspects and centralized in other aspects. I think in this space where we're talking about data, yes, we do have groups that are focused on that aspect. For example, a data layer that's common, so you can have various applications feeding off of it. So there is a lot of thought, not just thought, but there's a lot of activities and efforts around that, exactly for that, so that we don't end up in the end with a bunch of pieces that are great in and of itself, but the big picture is not there, right? And which is really where the, even as we go in further discussions here, is like the future, right? I think that's the other thing. So again, not to say that it's perfect by any means, but yeah, it's definitely a key thing where we do have groups focus on that topic. For that.
Yeah, I think there's always that fear when you start to like centralize certain areas, then you're going to become less efficient and like less agile. But yeah, finding that balance I always think is interesting. So thank you.
Kind of why I think we're a mix a little bit. So
Yeah,
of areas and others. So okay, no, the great. Any other thoughts? Anybody else would like to add anything to this topic? Okay, so let's move on to the next question. So this is a good one. I think still, very much still here, but it seems like hopefully we're gonna get out of it. But how COVID obviously is a major disruption, right, for everybody. So how has COVID impacted manufacturing process, and how does AI has AI played a role, I guess, in that for you? So I will start right now with Carol.
Okay, sure. It did disrupt a lot in the food beverage space. So I would say that it kind of disrupted the balance between supply and demand, right? And especially when you think when so many people went on lockdown, that meant a lot of people cooked at home much more than they did before, right? So for example, we had to change and we started manufacturing much less, products for restaurants or for businesses, because basically everybody was home in most of the places. And instead, manufacture more of instant or frozen foods, right? Because the reality is, that there is a large number of people that don't know how to cook very much. Now I think that more people that can cook better than before COVID, to see some silver lining, if there's any. But there's also the supply and procurement changed a lot. So for example, some cost of goods went up for some of the things. We buy a lot of produce, like cocoa, coffee, milk, tomatoes for the pizzas, and packaging materials. So we also had to do a lot of changes and optimizations based on that. So for that, we leveraged some of the AI that we have in some factories and in our supply chain as well. Because we had to basically change a lot of things very, very quickly. I also think that there were many months, and we're still under big travel restrictions, but for many months there was a complete travel ban, except for mission critical things in Nestlé. And so we had to empower our factory floor workers to do a lot of maintenance tasks they usually don't do, because we have engineering teams that do them, right? For like, complex machinery or cobots, for example. So we had to ship like overnight, almost, not overnight, but within like 5-6 weeks, a lot of AI powered remote assistants, like, headsets to help them, remote instructions, for example, remote assistance. And we moved some of the predictive maintenance that we had, scaled that more. So yes, we did a lot of changes, and I would say a bigger percentage than I thought coming from the AI program, leveraging AI. That was from a resourcing and governance perspective that I mentioned before. That was a challenge. COVID accelerated that by probably, I don't know, 2-3 years for us. Hard to tell, right? But at least that. And then also moving to remote means that we do a lot of, for example, sensory evaluations by bringing people to our R&D centers that had to be moved to remote. We're also exploring how we can continue to do a lot of virtual sensory and tastings and a lot of things. So there's a lot of places all over manufacturing and supply chain in Nestlé where things change. Yes.
Very good. Thanks, Carol. Sanjay, like to go next?
Yeah, those are great examples, Carol. I've seen similar impact with the clients I work with. Yeah, certainly more acceptance of remote monitoring. I think we've all seen the fact that technology adoption just went through the roof, and there was a much broader acceptance, especially from people who may not be comfortable with technology and elements like remote monitoring and getting alerts. We've seen a huge uptick in that. Predictive maintenance, definitely for sure. Worker safety has been one of the common use cases on detecting social distancing and face mask detection. Not so much on the production line, because the production line had been adapted to ensure worker safety. But in other common areas, we've seen machine vision applications for face mask detection, I think, which are not too difficult to develop. I think the other element certainly has been the fact that both leadership, our clients, where they may have shelved ideas around using data, using AI, have seen how quickly technology has been adopted. They've added and put investments into in the field of AI, and they realize that it's not so much that you have to be all in the same room. This can be something that can be done virtually, can impact and make things run with fewer people, and also provide the capabilities from a remote perspective. Yeah, so several examples across the board. Quite a few clients that I've worked with, they've seen a good amount of adoption, primarily accelerated by the need for being remote, and then also second, wider acceptance of adoption of technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we've all been made, even in related to AI, I think even we've all been, the entire workforce has been forced to work remotely. That alone, right, created the whole new thought, I think, and how people can really work, because you have to work remote. And I think that a lot of that's going to stay too. But I have some comments on this, but I'll let Alana go next. So what are your thoughts on this topic, Alana?
Yeah, I think it kind of adds on to what you said, Sanjay. I mean, what everyone said is, and I don't work for a manufacturing company or a technology company, but over the last year, I've been talking to a lot of manufacturers who are, everyone's more distributed. They rely so much on technology. One of our customers who works in the engineering department with a big aerospace company here in the U.S., they were like, I didn't realize how much I relied on walking down the hall and talking to, one of my other engineering colleagues who was an expert in X, Y, and Z. So it was really kind of a reality check for how, how people within kind of learned things and used technology. But I think it's also great too, because, with any crisis, I mean, technology becomes extremely accelerated. So, even executives that, they're really looking at, they're pulling back the curtain and they're like, how can we be more efficient? And how can we use technology and AI to do that? And I think it's, that'll continue to happen. The cracks are exposed, but I think too, it creates an opportunity. If you're not walking down the hall asking your coworker how to solve for something, you're doing things digitally, is always great to be able to build up, that the knowledge and the know-how within your organization and the processes to digitize those in areas that you wouldn't have previously. So I think, while there were challenges, also creates a lot of opportunity to become more advanced. It kind of forces you to be. And I think even being on, if you're not used to, using Zoom and creating relationships with your coworkers and people outside of it, it's like we've all become more of an expert in that area, just given the circumstances. So both small and large scale impacts, I'd say. Yeah,
I know even our young kids know how to run Zoom.
I can't imagine being in school, and having to do it all. I definitely feel for them. So.
So I share a lot of the same things here. I think in addition to for us, COVID had impacts. For example, think about we have a medical devices business, where orthopedic implants, sutures, and so forth. And last year, all the elective surgeries were put on hold for an extended period of time. So you can only imagine what kind of impact that has on that business, right? So, so on the other hand, consumer products, self-care products went through the roof, right? Things like Tylenol and all of that. So there's a lot. The bottom line, there was substantial disruption in our products, whether it's the disruption is like stopping of elective surgeries and kind of real disruption to business, all the way to now I need to produce X times more product to keep up with the demand on some certain products. So a real disruptive change, right? And I think what that kind of highlighted there is a couple of things, various things, but the two I'd like to mention is flexibility. In other words, manufacturing flexibility and resilience, which they're all really tied. The flexibility side to the resilience. So this resilience part is being able to, this is a disruption that nobody really saw coming, and it's not a small disruption; it's a huge disruption. We saw, Clorox, right, or sanitizing wipes. You couldn't buy one for like months, right? Paper toilet and all of this. So across manufacturing, I think there were critical products. The supply chain was like disrupted in a way that had never been, and the impacts were not like well, we're out of a product for a week, we're out of a product for months, right? I mean, there were times like somebody would, post on, on social media, I found, Clorox wipes. It's like a huge deal, right? So anyway, my point being that I think what that pointed to us is the need for the resilience and the predictive. How can we predict these kinds of events? So, or at least some indications of disruption. And I think one of the things that's clear is, especially for critical product manufacturing, is having the visibility all the way end to end on the supply chain, right? All the way from raw materials, all the way to the delivery. Having the transparency and the visibility of what's going on, such that you can really start to, and then AI on top of that, to start seeing, all of those variables that could be changing, whether there's a tornado here, in some part of the world, that while there's a couple of raw material supplies associated with that, or again, natural disasters and other types of things that can happen, political situations. I think that's where AI, it's a heavy area for us, is to look at how does that impact us in manufacturing? How can we better predict this disruption so we can be better? And that's not just, a J&J thing. This is for all of these manufacturers of critical products that, again, I think the supply chain last year got severely impacted. So resilience is a part I see AI playing a key role in for that, is providing those predictions. Of course, we need the data is the starting point. But then once you have the data, is those AI algorithms that allows us to get a trend these things and get better insights of what could happen. That's one. And then the flexibility that comes with it. Once you understand, disruptions will happen. And as well as we can do in some of those predictions, it's never necessary, there may be someone never may be able to really predict well, especially the consequence of the disruption. And how can we be more flexible in our manufacturing? And that's, I think, another place where AI can come in. How can I adapt a production line from producing product X to product Y quickly, right? And AI, I think, could have substantial plays in here. For example, let's say, if you could feed, just kind of thinking, if you can feed something into an AI algorithm that it learns something about a product, and it can adjust the actual product line in a way that it can now produce a slightly different type of product or something like that. I think those are opportunities for AI in the flexibility of manufacturing. So we can deal, because again, COVID specifically on the question, that's a big disruptor. So what kind of other big disruptors could happen like that, right? I think we all as manufacturers, it's a key area for us. So that's, I think, how we were impacted, or some ways we were impacted, and how we see AI helping us solve those gaps. So, okay. Any comments? Any additional comments or any thoughts anybody has on this question? So let's go to the next question. Our last question. Our last question is, now that we talked about how everything is going today, I guess with AI and what we're working on, where do we see the future of AI in the next 5 years, specifically of manufacturing, right? So I will start with Alana.
All right. Yeah, I'd say, I think it's going to change a lot. Tech changes so fast, of course. AI does too. But I'd say in terms of technology, Sanjay, you mentioned Industry 4.0, which I think is, I think it's huge. It's also kind of a buzzword. I doubt we use it day to day all the time, but the technology that's behind it is really important, and AI is central to that. So I think to be more specific, AI is going to become more advanced. Deep learning, which is a subset of machine learning, is going to, I think, become more prominent within the technologies that that manufacturers are using. I think mainly because it's going to be a lot more accessible, especially to small and mid-sized businesses, but also from a resource perspective. You can do more with less data. Simply put, in terms of deep learning, and requires a lot less of that kind of tweaking, because it's thinking a bit more deeply than what things like machine learning can do. So more accuracy with fewer resources, with less data to really feed into the business, I think will be big. And then from a business perspective, I'd say AI and automation has always been around productivity. I think that there is a shift, especially with the leaders in various sectors, to actually using it to drive business growth, which people are doing it in a lot of ways now, but I think it'll become more prominent than just simply being more efficient. So instead of, more than just finding the information that they need or doing things faster than they've been able to really being able to have that use AI to really propel innovation more than they have before. And, especially with, for example, in auto, more of a focus on sustainability and electric cars, like that's going to be really necessary for, leading automakers to get ahead. So I think that, those are kind of the two main areas I see, at least in the next 5 years.
Very good. Thanks, Alana. Sanjay, would you like to add to that?
Sure. And I think you've got to put things in perspective. I think everybody remembers when the famous online bookseller came online years ago, and they would say, you might be interested in this. So if you think that was the start of AI in some form, and you think about today where you are, I think from a consumer perspective, where your thermostat knows your habits and adjusts the comfort in your home. And now you think about, well, what's going to happen 5 years from now? So with there's different schools of thought, I would say what we heard today in terms of where AI is being used and adopted and challenges and which industries, I think 5 years from now, I would believe that AI will be more pervasive in some areas, maybe some areas that may not necessarily have had the application, either because of complexity or something that's too niche or may not just provide the ROI in investment. I think overall, I sense that when we look back 5 years from now, let's say we have the same panel discussion again, we may be talking about AI in a different tone. But that's sort of my perspective.
Very good. Thanks, Sanjay. Carol?
Let me see. I think sustainability is a very important one. We at Nestlé have our roadmap for net zero. I mean, that's by 2050. That's not 5 years from now, but we're laying the foundations now for that. So, and that related to AI has, has a cost as well in terms of carbon, right? So sustainability is going to be very big. That has been mentioned already, but like super connected and to Maria's point on flexibility and resilience before, we need to be able to adapt much faster than before. And for example, we have, besides the AI program, we've got a data program to make sure that we have all that data catalogs and start connecting the pieces of the massive jigsaw puzzle that we have for that. And then we also have connected operations, connected factories to digitize. We have a lot of the processes that are not digital yet, so connected and rapid to adapt, so we can troubleshoot faster. We can change production by, and I wouldn't say on the fly. I mean, that's the aspiration, but at least rapid. I see another trend in the food and beverages, which is towards personalization and customization, but at scale. And especially we have a lot of new entrants like smaller companies that are manufacturing. Yeah, and you can manufacture at a smaller scale and sell direct to consumer, which is the last one, right? Most food and beverages companies have historically been product makers, but not product sellers. So we sell to distributors and then sell to the final consumer. So we're moving more onto that model where we make and sell products and not only offline, which we started, for example, years ago with an Nespresso boutiques, but more online as well. And COVID is also accelerating that, by the way. So yeah, I mean, there's more.
No, that's great.
Those are important.
Interesting insights. Thanks for that, Carol. Yeah, I think I see the future as well. Even in some topics we already touched. I think we talked a lot about these AI applications. Let's call them these blocks, right? And then really the future I see is in connecting those blocks and those insights that will provide. It's one of those things like, when the iPhone came out, nobody prior to that, we used the phone to talk on the phone and text. Nobody until then nobody was like, oh, I really need a device that I can email. You know what I mean? It wasn't like it's one of those things. Once you have that functionality, then now you didn't know what you didn't know, and I need this, right? So I think it's one of those things too. I think that big picture, whether we call it a smart factory or whatever we call it, is really having those insights from those different processes, whether it's in this part of manufacturing, that and connecting that to make real, going even back to the point of resilience and flexibility, having those insights and that data to really make decisions that impact the business. I think that's one thing. that it's still in the future, I think, overall, because there's a lot, for all the reasons we already discussed, some of the challenges in connecting those things. Also about the customer centricity that Carol pointed out. I think that's the other thing. It's being customer centric. For J&J, the customer could be a consumer like us, with shampoos and things. It could be a doctor at a hospital or hospitals itself. So being around that and understanding those needs that customer experience, and then taking a back step on that. And how does that imply, even from a manufacturing supply chain perspective, how can I make the experience better for that customer? Much better, right? And improve that. I think that's kind of where, and that all has it backs its way into the manufacturing. And that, and the data aspect of it. How can I learn more insight about how these products are used again? And so I can feed that back in, and et cetera. So again, going around that customer centricity aspect. So those are things I think as we progress in the next years, and as AI and other technologies that should continue to evolve, that will open a lot of other doors. So those are some of my thoughts. So I know we have only a couple of minutes left. I will open, I don't know if Sanjay, Carol, or Alana have anything to add to this question. If not, then I'll switch over to Patricia to take over from here.
Awesome. Thanks, Maria. We actually did get a couple of questions come in. So we have about 3 minutes left. So I will jump in on those. But first, just thank you to all of our panelists. This has been an awesome conversation. So the first question that we have, your first questions defined well what we see every day in our work: AI, human cooperation, scaling, etc. There's no silver bullet to solve all of these challenges at once, but what's the top pick as an action or theme that you would turn your eyes to accelerate AI adoption within industries? So that's a big question, but I would love to get your quick thoughts on that one.
I guess I'll chime in real quick. I think to accelerate AI adoption, I would say it's all about the business case. It's all about the need you're solving. It has to start at, if you have a clear need, and let's say, quote unquote, AI is the right solution for the need, it's going to happen, right? Because if you have of course, the business case, your need needs to be big enough, or big enough is probably not the word. It has to be a real need. If you need and you show the match, it's going to happen, right? I mean, it's a matter of now, unless there's technical feasibility issues or that, but in terms of getting what I consider many times what the challenges are more organizational challenges, whether it's funding or line alignments, and so it's going to happen, right? It might take a little, but it's going to happen. I think to me, that's sometimes it seems like the simple thing, the business side of it, it's actually, I find it to be one of the most challenging things, but I'll let my co-panelists chime in.
No, I fully agree. I fully agree. When the need is real, everything falls into place, sooner or later. So absolutely, yes.
Yeah, I think you covered it. I'm good.
Awesome. Well, I'll give us one more question just to wrap things up. So this final question is, you seem to suggest that AI can increase adaptability of a business. Could you elaborate more on this point, especially as compared to a human being?
I mean, I'll give a really quick answer to that. I guess it's a lot more about, they can spot issues. A computer can find issues and can make decisions a lot faster than we can as humans. They can't make all the decisions that are necessary, but they can recognize them, and then humans can kind of implement different changes to adapt to whatever the scenario is.
Great point. Anyone else want to chime in?
Yeah, I think it's a matter of speed and scale. Like if you have sometimes 500 different variables, and to be able to spot the correlations and the patterns for a person, even if you have decades of experience, that's hard to do, and it will take time, right? And sometimes it's called intuition, while machines can spot that, with the complex math, basically. So there are things that basically we cannot do as fast and as big.
And I now agree that, and I would just add the last thing is, I think, yeah, exactly. There's certain things a human may not be able to spot, and equivalently, there are certain things that, I don't think any of us here are saying I can do everything either. So there's many things only a human can do as well. So I think, it's at least as of the state of technology today, right? For sure. So I think it's that, but for those things that the computer can do really well, computer robot, they don't get tired, they can work, and then that's where I think the focus is, right? So.
Awesome. All right, well, that's all the time we have for today. So thank you to the audience for sharing those questions with us. And thank you to our panelists for this amazing content. And a special thank you to Maria for moderating for us today. This has been an awesome panel, and we at AI4 would love to say thank you to everyone for joining us today. And we're so excited to see you at our next event. Thanks so much and have a wonderful day.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. Have a great
Thanks
day.
for having me.
All right, bye.